Hey there, I'm Jer Stays, and welcome to your Daily Detroit. It is a melting Wednesday, February 9th, 2022. Contributing writer for Newsweek and news and features editor for Our Detroit, Steve Freese, is back. We're going to work our way through 4 stories around town. A legendary local sports writer is about to embark on a special trip. Plus, and this is Steve's cover story in Newsweek, can the GOP make inroads with black voters? Plus, he did an Our Detroit profile on Michigan's Secretary of State race and Jocelyn Benson. And finally, a national story has become local as truckers have locked up the bridges to Canada with what they're calling a freedom convoy. What's behind it? Let's get started. Steve Freese, welcome back, sir.
Hey, it's great to be back. Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year. It's been a while. So we've got a bunch of stories to talk about. You have been very busy. First off, I remember this name, reading him frankly, when I was a kid, Jerry Green. And he's got this amazing Super Bowl streak because he's apparently the only writer left from the original Super Bowl.
Who's been to all of them?
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
I don't know. There might have been somebody who was there at the first time that didn't make it for all 56, but he's the only one who, as he heads out to LA this weekend at 93 years old, he's the only one who has covered all 56 of them.
That's an impressive streak. What drew you to that story?
Actually, it's funny. I was looking for a sports writer. I was online looking for freelance sports writers, and I came across a piece from WXYZ from I think last year or the year before about this guy who was the last one going to the Super Bowl. And I thought, wow, what a great story. And so Newsweek was real interested, and Jerry is just this really chatty and engaging and smart as a tack fella who, he's the last one, and he may or may not be going to the last Super Bowl too. He's 93. He has to use a wheelchair. He's got some health issues, and in particular, this kind of jars me. The Detroit News does not pay for him to go.
What? Wow.
Yeah, that kind of bugs me a lot. I think we're going to have a GoFundMe or something to cover Jerry's costs because it's ridiculous. They were the ones when he retired in 2002, I think, or something like that. The Detroit News were the ones that said, "Hey, can you keep going to the Super Bowl?" And so he did. And at some point along the way, the Detroit News has run out of money and doesn't have it to send anybody, I guess. And so they don't pay for his flight or his hotel or his food or anything. He basically loses money on the deal, but it's a thing he's done every year. He's the only one who does it. And so he goes anyway. And now that he's of a certain age, for the last couple of years, his daughter goes with him so that, somebody's there to look out for him, make sure he doesn't get hurt and gets where he needs to go.
There is something about the family angle, but still, I think it's kind of emblematic of, some of the things that have been all people in media have been dealing with in recent years. I mean, I think it's kind of crazy that, there's no money for him to go. And yet this is going to be something that will definitely be like a front and center thing, especially this year with everything with Matt Stafford.
Yeah, that's the best part of the whole thing is that, this is a sports writer who's been in the business since the 50s. He's covered all of the Detroit teams that have won championships, including the Lions when they won championships in the 50s, before the Super Bowl existed. But he's also notoriously the only of the original reporters who never got to cover a Super Bowl that his hometown team was in. Because, of course, the Lions have never been to a Super Bowl, and except for the one that came here, I guess. They weren't in it; they were just there, I guess. And so, of course, the plot line of Matt Stafford getting to very likely win a Super Bowl his first year out of this whole thing is a great story. He's also sort of he's kind of hoping he can get to talk to Stafford, but it's very unlikely because they have everything so tightly controlled. It's sad. It's interesting talking to him. It's interesting to read about him because you get a perspective on what it was like to be able to just walk up to Joe Namath lounging at the pool in 1969 and talk to these people. That these athletes were accessible and people got to know them, and now, of course, they're just behind many layers of publicists. Even prominent college athletes are the same way.
Have you noticed that kind of change too, even in your career? I mean, you haven't been around as long as Jerry, but I mean, I feel like I've noticed it in the last 20 years.
I remember in the 90s when I was an intern at a paper in Kansas, and I went to cover some stories about the Royals, and I was able to just go into the locker room, chat up any of the players I wanted to. Nowadays, there's actually a movement to get reporters out of locker rooms, and I kind of get that. I mean, I do. I always did think it was a little strange that these people had, you know, had strangers standing around in their dressing room. You wouldn't have that at any other workplace. But at the same time, yeah, no, I mean, it's just not the same anymore. I mean, I'm really surprised sometimes as a editor at Our Detroit that it can be really hard to get an interview with well-known or prominent or successful college athletes. I mean, Naz Hillman or Aiden Hutchinson. I mean, these people who you wouldn't think would be that hard to reach. But sports is the way it is now, and all these people have media training, and they're all they all know how to deal with us. It's not nearly as much fun as it used to be.
Yeah, when everybody's got a personal brand.
Yeah, that too. Including the reporters.
Right, right. Another story that actually made the cover on Newsweek is about the GOP betting on black candidates as the way forward. Of course, you mentioned a couple of names that come to my mind right away locally: John James, James Craig. I know that painting any group as a monolith is a mistake. So is taking a group for granted. Do you think that there's a way that the GOP could make some headway? I mean, for people who don't know, like African American voters, black voters have historically almost been completely lockstep with the Democratic Party in recent history.
At least in terms of how they vote.
Yes.
Yes, and I mean, you talk about monolith. There is no group of voters in American politics more loyal to any party than the black vote is for the Democratic Party. In excess of 90% of Democrats are either of black people are either Democrats or they vote in Democratic primaries or they vote for Democrats. I mean, it's pretty significant. And the big problem that Democrats have traditionally faced is not the prospect of black voters voting for Republicans. It's that not enough of the black voters will go and vote. Period. I mean that's always been their thing. Has been how do you drive turnout, and that's something that, for example, in Georgia, Stacey Abrams has really mastered, and now there are a lot of efforts around the country among Democrats to try to expand the voting base. But at the same time, there is I would say, a normalization to some extent of prominent black conservatives who are running for office and are, in many cases, quite successful. Often in the South, the lieutenant governor of North Carolina, the lieutenant governor of Virginia, the attorney general in Kentucky, the senator from South Carolina. These are all very prominent black Republicans who are winning statewide office. But even in Michigan, it is notable that while John James did not win either of his two Senate races, he was the highest polling Republican on the ballot in both 2018 and 2020. He got more votes in 2020 than Donald Trump did in Michigan. And there's a sense that perhaps perhaps there's a marginal amount, but a potent amount of Black voters who might be more interested or willing to listen to the argument being made by a Black Republican running than a white Republican. And, that is actually something that James Craig said to me directly. I mean, he came right out and said that he believes that because he's a Black man and he's an authentic Detroiter, I think he might be making a distinction between himself and John James, who's sort of a Detroiter. And because he's been the police chief and people know him, he's part of the community, that he might get a more open hearing from some more people. And then the Black Republicans who make these arguments, they try to persuade by leaning on a list of issues that they see in polling Black voters actually support. Black voters do tend to support a more conservative view on abortion, same-sex marriage, on gun control.
Yeah, you were mentioning those issues. A lot of Black people are religious. In the city of Detroit, a poll last year showed that Detroiters reject the term defund the police by a 3-to-1 margin. And almost 9 in 10 Detroiters said they'd feel safer with more cops on the street, which is kind of a different message than I think some Democratic candidates are putting out there.
There's a lot of sort of dissonance between what a lot of Black people experience in our culture and in our society and how they feel about some of these issues. You take Donald Trump, for example. Donald Trump, called a whole bunch of countries asshole countries. He, did the whole thing with that there are very fine people on both sides of the white supremacy question. He said a lot of things. He cleared out the Lafayette Square with the military in order to have his little photo op. So he's done a number of things that are problematic for Black people. And of course, he calls out any Black city that doesn't vote for him as corrupt and claim that there's been voter fraud. But at the same time, he also appointed prominent Black people to very prominent positions, including to the cabinet. He frequently will just sort of go off script and endorse candidates that he just likes, even though they're not necessarily sort of longtime Republicans. Today, in fact, there's a state senator from Georgia. His name is Vernon Jones. And Vernon Jones was, until about a year or so ago, a Democrat. He retired from the state Senate in Georgia. He became a Republican, became a MAGA Republican, spoke at the Republican convention, decided he was going to run for governor of Georgia, was persuaded not to run for governor and instead to run for Congress. And today, Donald Trump endorsed him. And now he's not somebody who was, waiting in line in Republican politics. He was not somebody who paid his dues with the Republican Party the way that it used to be done. And that had always sort of resulted in white candidates. So James Craig is the same way, in a way. He's not somebody who or even John James. They're not people who waited their turn to go ahead. They're people who somebody is making calculations have a great deal of appeal and could in fact grab some votes, enough votes to turn an election. I don't know if that's true. With Gretchen Whitmer, I think she's probably in a strong position as governor of Michigan. But if it's a really bad year for Democrats, and it certainly doesn't look good, anything can happen.
I also think down the line, not just with Whitmer, but I'm thinking about House races.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that you believe that Democrats could do to try to help shore up their turf?
I mean, I'm not really in the business to give either party advice on how to reach their voters. I think it's not lost on anybody that Joe Biden is going to appoint a Black woman to the Supreme Court, chose a Black woman for his vice president. They do a lot of this sort of signaling and inclusive effort. So, I think that this year is just going to be a hard year for Democrats. It always is. It's an off year election, and the president, this president is was elected because he's not the other guy. I mean, he was not really elected with a huge wellspring of deep love from the country or any particular demographic per se. So when he falters, it's hard to recover from that. And the rest of the party suffers because of it.
That leads me to your Hour profile, where you looked at and talked with Michigan's Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. She's a Detroiter. Usually, Secretary of State is kind of a ho-hum affair in the past, but I mean, for a variety of reasons, there's more focus on her. You've got all of the conversations about voting, ballots, and everything else. Can you kind of walk through what you learned doing that?
I learned that her opponents so far are not serious people, and she may be very, very lucky because of that.
Mm.
It is a rough year for Democrats, and there has been a lot of complaining about the DMV, although I think that they may have sort of worked out the kinks, but it's first impressions or most recent impressions. And if you had to get a driver's license during the pandemic or before like this past summer, it was kind of a mess, and she has to take responsibility for that, or at least she will take some blame for that. But like you said, that's not what this election is likely to be about, because the right has realized that secretaries of state are a position that has a great deal of control over balloting, counting, just general election policy and administration. And so the people who are interested in running for that position, and right now I believe there are two, Bo LaFave, is that how it's said? I think he's running for a state, for a secretary of state. I may be wrong. And Christina Caramo, who has Donald Trump's endorsement and is one of these people who claims that she saw voter fraud at the polls, and I mean that's all she's interested in. I mean, she's not she hasn't said boo about long lines at the DMV or anything that might actually be interesting to voters or might resonate with them. And they may get to that, but that's not where she's starting out. She is a hard right, also a Black Republican candidate, who hung up on me when I tried to interview her, and I was confused because I said, I'm doing this piece on your opponent. Don't you want to talk about her? And she said no, hung up. And then when the piece went live, she lied on Twitter that I had written all these lies about her, and I hardly wrote about her at all. And there's like maybe two sentences in the whole piece about this woman, and I asked her to explain to me what of the very few bits of information I provided were lies, and she didn't respond. She never responded to any of it. So she's not a really serious candidate, but she's probably going to get that nomination, partly because the Republicans in the state nominate those candidates through their conventions, and that means that they'll be the hardcore MAGA folks will be there to, make sure that everybody who gets nominated at that convention, believes that the election was stolen and is convinced that Donald Trump is secretly the president right now, and that the folks who rampaged at the Capitol were just tourists looking at the artwork and staying within the velvet rope. So, I mean, they're not going to be the kind of people that most voters in this state would likely find credible. So, I mean, unless it's a really, really big wave for Republicans, It probably Jocelyn Benson's race to lose. And she's certainly doing her best right now, going on TV as much as she can, talking about voter fraud and her fears about whether, you know, the democracy can survive if all of these different efforts are successful to curtail voting or change the rules.
Mm. Well, I'll make sure to link to all three of those pieces in the show notes. Finally, I wanted to talk to you about a national story that has become quite local. Truckers have stopped up the border at the Ambassador Bridge and the Blue Water Bridge, causing backups onto the freeways, snarling commerce. This is something that started in Ottawa, the Canadian capital, a couple of weeks ago, but it's come here. It's already had impacts. Stellantis this morning cut its shift at their Windsor plant. At the heart of this are vaccine mandates that apparently are now a thing for truckers to cross over. And even though almost 90% of truckers are vaccinated and the Canadian Trucking Union is against these protests, this is still happening. There were reports in Canadian media of the earlier protests and the earlier protesters pooping on lawns and urinating on Canada's National War Memorial. Over the last few days, that energy has spread here. It's clear there's a lot of cross-border stuff with this. One outlet is reporting that there was a Facebook group, a series of Facebook groups created by a stolen account that helped gin some of this stuff up. A lot of American political figures are involved in this and pushing it forward. And just this week, the head of the Conservative Party in Canada changed to someone who was photographed wearing a Make America Great Again hat, which I feel like is an awkward look if you're like a party leader of another country.
Well, Canada is America.
Just with better maple syrup, right?
It's like, why do we get to call ourselves American and the Mexicans and the Canadians don't, or they don't get to just be known as American? But no, look, I think there are a few things going on here, because the fact is that there is genuine opposition to vaccine mandates and mask mandates and all this stuff. The people are just over this pandemic. They're just over it, and you see that going on all over the country now with even Democratic leaders who are removing mask mandates and other rules because people are fed up with it. I wouldn't discount the passion and the opinion and the political effort that's going on in Canada, just because there are some people who have allegiance with American right-wing politics. We made that mistake, I think, with the Tea Party. We said, oh, well, the Tea Party is really just a fake movement being created by wealthy, Koch brother people who are fostering this fake populist revolt. But it wasn't a fake populist revolt. It turned the country, and it still continues to roil the country. So I wouldn't necessarily discount it just because there's some connections to weird people in this country or something shady. That's a lot of trucks. It's a lot of people making their decision to use their livelihood, their massive vehicles to make a political statement. And it probably doesn't do anybody any good to ignore them. I do think it's interesting, however, that whenever there's a Black Lives Matter protest or some sort of a protest from the progressive left that snarls traffic, causes a few hours delay of something somewhere in some highway or some city, it's a horrible thing. But when the truckers in Canada create an international, financial disaster to make a point, the right wing folks say, "Hey, right on, civil disobedience," or something to that effect.
Steve Freese, thank you so much for helping sort out all this stuff. Give us a little bit of, bigger picture insight. I'll make sure to link to all of the things. And until next time.
Yes, until next time. Take care.
And that is all for today's show. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to support what we're doing, consider buying us a coffee. buymeacoffee.com/Daily Detroit. Much appreciated. All right, Devin O'Reilly will be in the seat on Friday, and then we got some things in mind for tomorrow. We're going to see how they land. Anyway, I'm Jer Stays. Take care of each other, and I'll see you around Detroit.